This is the Washington Week Webcast Extra.
Hello and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. I'm joined around the table by John Dickerson of Slate Magazine and CBS News, Pete Williams of NBC News, Nancy Youssef of the Daily Beast, and Michael Crowley of Politico. We'll start by talking about the ceasefire that went poof. That's in Ukraine, where Russian-backed rebels claimed control of a key transport hub and set Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko back on his heels again. Did we see that coming, Michael? I think so.
I think we did, and I talked to some, Mike McFaul, the former ambassador to Moscow. It's no secret. Soon after this ceasefire, quote unquote, was inked, he was very skeptical. And
I talked to him too. I remember this. He didn't expect it to go anywhere.
No, and his diagnosis is unfortunately, it sounds quite plausible to me, and it's depressing, which is that we're likely to see a series of agreements, ceasefires, truces, that are broken, the pro-Russian separatists backed by the Russian military in eastern Ukraine.
Isn't this like the third ceasefire already? There was one in September and there was one before that. So
I think that's right. Yeah. And so what happened in this case was fighting broke out again, and the pro-Russian forces took more territory, and we're probably going to have some mad scramble to stitch together some other agreement. But what's happening is the facts on the ground are evolving in Vladimir Putin's favor. His pro-Russian forces are digging in. They're claiming more territory. But really, the West doesn't want to escalate any farther. The Europeans don't want more sanctions. President Obama does not want to send arms to Kiev. We don't want to cut off Moscow from the SWIFT international banking system, which would be another option. But the Russians have indicated that they would flip out. It almost sounds like they're more worried about that than the military supplies. So I think we just may see more of this muddling through with gradual strengthening of Putin's position and, frankly, a victory for Putin over the West.
There are so many issues from Iran to Afghanistan to Ukraine, thank you, to ISIS, where there are no simple answers. In fact, every week seems to bring a setback. The interesting thing that came out this week, the president mentioned this week in his speech at the conference, at the Anti-Violent Extremism Conference, but which a lot of people are talking about, is this idea of foreign recruits for ISIS. And today we saw where Great Britain was worried about 3 teenage girls who had gone missing. There seems to be a pipeline that nobody knows how to stop.
That's right. So according to the U.S. military, they've killed 6,000 ISIS fighters, and the estimates are 4,000 fighters have come in, many of them foreign. Now, the good news for the U.S. is that there have been only about 150 from this country compared to 6,000 from France and 1,000 from the U.K. And the interesting thing that came out about women in particular is there are about 550 women who are believed to have gone. This is according to a Guardian piece today. And there is a relentless Twitter campaign that goes on. The women that are there will reach out to other women and try to recruit them and tell them how great it is and that they're fighting a holy cause. It's a relentless campaign to recruit women.
Are these women actual frontline fighters?
No. So what they are is sometimes brides to ISIS fighters, that they are sort of, if you will, back home, that they produce children to continue the Islamic State. They can be frontline fighters, but it's pretty rare. More often that they are used to be brides and support, if you will, for the men fighting.
And there's no way, we saw in Paris after the Charlie Hebdo shootings and killings, that we saw that the woman who escaped was another example of someone who just kind of went back into the fight.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, how aggressively they're pushing for women in particular.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, let's come back home here to a couple of domestic issues. You, Pete, are up at the Supreme Court preparing to cover what is going to be another big, kind of pivotal challenge to the president's health care law on March 4th. There will be arguments. What are we watching for?
Well, 3 years ago, the Supreme Court rescued Obamacare in its early stages before it really took effect. Now the question is, will it be allowed to continue? 3 years ago, the question was the constitutional authority. Now it's a much narrower question, but a pivotal one, which is, do you get the subsidy if you got your insurance on the federal exchange? The challengers are saying that there's 3 little words in the statute that say you only get the subsidy if your program was established by the state. I guess that's 4 little words. And the government is saying, no, that's way too technical a read of it. And that's what it's going to come down to for the Supreme Court. But the subsidies are critical because it makes it possible for many more people to afford it. The subsidy is now, you get about a 72% discount if you get the subsidy. So it makes insurance affordable. Take the subsidy away, fewer people can afford it, and then you only have the people in it who are really sick, and the whole thing starts to go into what they call a death spiral.
I talked to Sylvia Burwell, the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, so we can ask her, so what's your plan B? What's your backup plan? And no matter how many different ways I phrased that, how many euphemisms I came up with, she wouldn't say that there was even a plan B, because she couldn't imagine that the court would allow people to something to happen that would take away something from people that they already have.
That's right. As a journalist, you're always looking for that punchy quote in the government brief that says, if you don't do this, it's going to be horrible.
Right.
And it's not there because they don't want to really give the court the idea that that could happen. But the friend of court briefs that have been filed by the insurance industry is saying to the Supreme Court, don't do this. The states are divided on this, interestingly. But even some states that don't have their own exchanges, that have the federal exchange, are saying, don't take this subsidy away. The subsidy is the critical key that makes insurance affordable.
Okay. Now, finally, this puzzlement. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani weighs in again on his assessment of the President of the United States. He said, I do not believe, and I know this is a horrible thing to say, but I do not believe that the president loves America. He doesn't love you, and he doesn't love me. He wasn't brought up the way you were brought up, and I was brought up through love of this country. The former mayor has been busy pedaling backward and forward on this ever since, and forcing people who actually want to run for president right now to say whether they agree with him. Chief among them, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who was actually at the event where Giuliani spoke. What did his answer say?
Well, he didn't say much of anything. Scott Walker said Rudy Giuliani can say what he wants to say. I know I love this country.
Except that he didn't say much of anything. Isn't that a sign of something?
Yes. I mean, so this was a sort of political belch by Rudy Giuliani. And people were either at the table are either embarrassed or they pretend it didn't happen, or somebody says you shouldn't do that at the table. Nobody said that. Yeah. Now, it's interesting because we have seen, there was a famous scene in Waukesha, Wisconsin, in the 2008 campaign where John McCain and Sarah Palin were at a rally, and a woman, it was a really heated rally. There were people screaming at Palin and McCain to be tougher and that the country was going down the tubes and Obama was going to steal this election away. And a woman got up and she was kind of free associating attacks on Obama. And at one point she said, and he's an Arab, which McCain interrupted her, thinking she was going to say that.
Isn't Waukesha not far from Scott Walker's hometown, or it may be Scott Walker's hometown?
He's from Wauwatosa.
Okay, there's
or he lives
W.
in Wauwatosa.
That's right.
There are a lot of W's in
Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, exactly. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
We're not into Kenosha, though,
no.
Which is. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes, Waukesha.
John McCain.
And McCain stopped her and said, he's a good man, he's a good family man, and I just disagree with him on policy. Marco Rubio said a version of that. He said, of course he loves his country, I just think his policies are all wrong. That's the most interesting thing here. Rudy Giuliani is, he can say whatever he wants.
Right.
There is an opportunity for some candidate to even go to go sort of one step further. Nobody wants to do it, of course, because there's a sliver of the Republican Party who has always felt that way about the president, that he is kind of other from his background, from his views, from his ivory tower, whatever it is about him. They think he does not come from or is not a part of the American story.
Is there a risk to still running against the president when he's not on the ballot?
In a Republican primary, no.
No.
But, let's look at somebody like Jeb Bush, who has argued explicitly several times that he is running for the general election.
Right.
I think Republicans have looked at their own party, some have said, and said, we're a little too coarse on some of these things. And particularly when you say an African-American president is, didn't grow up the way we did, that gets awfully close to lines that Republicans don't want to cross. And so, but right now it sits where it is, and it'll go on until we have the next thing to be exercised about, which should be in about 5 minutes.
Bright and shiny thing. So we'll leave it safely there. Stay online and check out what else our panelists are writing and covering, and my latest take, the Hillary and Jeb Chronicles. And we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.